see whether anyone's got a question there. Yep. Which one of us? Looks like we're good then.
Yeah, really interesting demo, guys. Can't wait to try it at home. What I'm wondering is, so you're showing most of these benchmarks where you've got, you know, the latest processor, a whole bunch of binning of the latest processors and that sort of stuff. Do they do other benchmarkings where, you know, you've got a particular type of processor from, let's say, ages ago, and it's a benchmark of a specific type of processor under, let's say, air-cooled? Like, are there a different bunch of benchmarking scenarios rather than just the fastest you can absolutely get?
Can I take this one?
Yeah, for sure.
You're in trouble. You know why you're in trouble? That's how I got into overclocking. I had like an AMD 3000 plus. I mean, I was overclocking before that, but it was the 3000 plus CPUs that were highly overclockable, more efficient than Intel, and they were cheap. That was the best part, right? So I got a really decent one. I started competing. I used SuperPi benchmark, and we had ladders on alpha memory. So the fastest guy doing 8 million calculations, the most efficient guy. And then we had about 20 guys that were a bit crazy. Two in particular, one called Eva 2000 and one called Tim Marshall, Tim_M, that were exceptional at this. And we copied them. And then I decided to go to OCU trading section and buy one more chip. And that turned into another 30 chips. Yeah, that's how it starts. Then went from air cooling to water cooling, and then went to single stage phase cooling. Then went to cascade dry ice and liquid nitrogen. So you're on the right track.
So it's a slippery slope sort of thing.
We're absolutely not about the latest and greatest to the most expensive, but it's actually about whatever you've got, have fun with it, test it, benchmark it, increase frequencies, try and push it to the limit. Always start cheap. I love cheap, right? Because that's, you know, even if you kill it, it's cheap thrills, who cares, right? You're not going to cry about it. I mean, when you kill a $1,000 graphics card, well, that hurts, you know?
It's not like wiping out a Pentium
and we've done a lot of that.
3258.
But when you kill a $100 chip, and actually, you know what? Especially Intel chips, because we haven't really been using AMD a lot, to be honest. The AMD is a bit of a dinosaur at the moment. Unfortunately, it's the benchmark performance, clock for clock, is just not there. But there have been some rumors that the new stuff is going to be reasonably decent. But on the Intel side, where a lot of our experience has been for the last, say, 4 or 5 years, they're ridiculously hard to kill those chips, right? We do. Then he overclocked it some more. Still running. And then he decided, all right, I'm going to start doing Windows restarts and benchmarks. Still running. It took him half an hour to kill a CPU without a heatsink, fully overclocked. It was ridiculous. And then later he figured out he could just run a 9-volt battery on the back of the pins. It's way easier. Intel RMA just says. Yeah, so look, it's a good question, and don't, like, a lot of people's perception about overclocking is like, especially extreme overclocking, these guys throwing a lot of money at it and all that. Actually, we don't really. Like, we have a good group of people where we find out good prices about it for LN2, good deals for hardware. We also bin and test. Some guys don't like buying 30 chips to find a good one, so they just
it's definitely about the community.
Pre-binned ones. So.
The other thing is HWBot, before we move on, they have like rookie rumbles and like entry-level events where you can go and compete against people of the same like cooling class, so it might be air cooling or water cooling, and with certain hardware, so you can get into it against people of so you don't have to jump in against professionals or something like that. So,
I mean, we've got Country Cup, the big competition that we run that HWBot runs every year. They've got a stage this year. It's 3D Marco 3, so a benchmark from 2003. And it's restricted at the moment to the 8800 series and 9800 series graphics cards. So we're talking cards that you can buy on eBay for $5 to $50, and we need specifically those cards to compete. You might need to throw, you know, like a decent CPU at it, but it's not 100% necessary to buy the absolute cheapest things. Like, I've got a day job, I can't afford all this stuff, but you know, we just push what we have as hard as we can.
It becomes a bit of a scavenger hunt, you know. That's where you're going through the for sale for trade forums. I mean, that's how I first had an interaction with Dino beyond just, you know, forum posts. I bought some Micron D9 GMH-based DDR2 RAM from him. And before we knew it, we were in my garage up on the Central Coast, just overclocking with dry ice and single stage face, and yeah, just the boundaries keep moving. But it's, you don't have to start with crazy high-end stuff. You can just have entry-level stuff and just have a tinker and a play. Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys.
You have a question yet?
Yeah, this might be slightly outside of your wheelhouse, but thought I'd ask. I noticed you're using a lot of liquid nitrogen, liquid helium. Do you ever have issues with condensing oxygen out of the atmosphere with overclocking?
It's a good, actually, question that we didn't really mention much about in the presentation, but safety, you know, overclocking is very important to us, right? So liquid nitrogen is something that can be hazardous if you're not treating it with respect that it deserves. So one of the issues is lack of oxygen, right? If you are in a short or small room, you will sometimes lose oxygen. Sometimes the way we occasionally notice, not here, but when we mentioned Taiwan, we have like 4 or 5 250-litre liquid nitrogen tanks, and we're burning a lot. So sometimes we'll burn 600 or 700 litres in space of 8 or 9 hours because we're using multiple graphics cards and stuff. And sometimes when you fire a torch, it will not fire. There's not enough oxygen to set fire to the gas. So then everyone resets, like, okay, let's just make sure that we are, you know, all alive.
Or we get all or when we get all giggly, everyone starts laughing all the time, then we also know.
Yeah, like generally when we overclock, obviously if you're in a big room, there's plenty of oxygen. You're not going to run out of it. And it's absolutely recommended if you are opening a small room, just to open windows and things where that generally is plenty. Some people, when they watch us overclock, they wonder why we don't wear gloves and things, but
it burns.
It burns off. So unless you sort of hold it like that for about 4 or 5 seconds, you're not going to get a burn.
Yeah, like you can sort of have your hand like that as long as it's running off and you just pour it over.
But we
don't recommend that.
Yeah, you literally just flick liquid nitrogen off your skin.
Yeah.
That's fine.
But the thing is, it sounds scary because everyone's watched Terminator, and that's the first thing that we get. Yes, I mean, we watched the movie. Yes, it's good. Yes, the guy freezes, and he's metal, and he somehow shatters, which is impossible in like 2 seconds, and probably wouldn't have actually happened because there's not enough water in that composition of that machine to be able to shatter like that.
You could screw with the metal state enough that you could pass a below glass transition, but it's not going to happen doing stuff like that.
No.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, we take it very seriously, and you know, I'll tell you something. I've been doing this for liquid nitrogen in particular about 10 years. Never heard of anyone injuring themselves, and I've heard of people swallowing it on purpose just to see what it'll do to them, and that is absolutely ridiculous. This guy's an idiot, but all he was doing is just burping for like about an hour, and then he got better. But yeah, absolutely do not recommend that. But it's an extreme that sort of shows that it's you know.
And it's not just liquid nitrogen to be mindful of it. Things like dry ice as well, which is compressed carbon dioxide. That'll sublime straight to carbon dioxide. So again, you have a chance of dissipating the oxygen within your local environment. So just be mindful of these sort of things. Have windows open, you know. The outside, it's not going to hurt you. It's okay.
We have some questions on Twitch as well. I can read them out.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one more point about the safety. Is that on most of the big live events or big competition, there is oxygen meters present. So whenever there's a large group of extreme overclockers coming together, there's certainly, we're certainly making sure that there's enough oxygen in the room. As Dino said, I haven't heard of any major accidents.
Yeah.
We have a question over there.
Do you use many custom parts for overclocking?
Sorry,
Do you mind if I take this one? Yeah. I was actually writing something on this subject earlier this week, and just focusing on how the community essentially fell in place to fulfill the gaps where the vendors weren't. So whether it's having LN2 pots from the likes of Kingpin, DeBauer, SF3D, these guys have developed these different liquid nitrogen pots to be able to allow the broader community to actually follow and also facilitate this passion. So that's certainly one area where the custom gear comes in. But then also the vendors over the last 10 years or so have really been developing more overclocking focused products that have allowed for these limits to be pushed even further. Yeah.
There's also, speaking of custom, there are some guys that would go as extreme as taking, for example, a graphics card and unsoldering the memory ICs of that graphics card to solder it on another graphics card to make sure that they have the best overclockable memory chips on that specific graphics card. So there is a lot of custom stuff going on there.
That's pretty crazy. That's very rare as well. Like you have to have a BGA machine, and that's like some crazy high level stuff. That's
ultimate pursuit of speed.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing at the moment is people get a $1,200 graphics card and remove all the power off of it. So as soon as you do that, the card's ruined, and put an external power supply onto it. So you've got this massive card and like a big power supply coming off the top of it, just so you can have more power to overclock 100 megahertz further. So that's the biggest modification now. It used to be that we'd have to mod all the boards, the voltage and that, but the vendors do that for us now.
Yeah.
So it's just the graphics cards, and now even the vendors are starting to do all that for us. So we don't have to as much these days. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I can actually think back, James, to I think it was about 2008. We were doing the early development testing for, I think it was the DQ6, and we blew up one of the MOSFETs. We actually had this little flame pop up, like 30 centimeters up, because we were just running so many volts through this thing. Something that neither James or I really expected, but hey, it was what it was, and we just said, okay, that board's fried. Hopefully, didn't take the CPU with it. And that was just development testing so that you guys can get, a product where you don't have these sort of problems.
I think one of the benefits of you blowing up that MOSFET is exactly what you mentioned before about running a CPU without heatsink. Hardware vendors have looked at us, and we're blowing up these parts, let's say 10 years ago or something like that, and they've built in all these safety mechanisms now. So it's starting to get very difficult to actually blow up hardware.
It's very user friendly.
Yeah, if your fan shuts down, your CPU will first, it will heat up, and then it will start reducing itself in frequency to enable to stay working stably. And if it hits still the critical temperature at the lowest frequency, it'll just shut itself down to prevent any other system damage.
We have a question, Twitch, and I'm going to ask Neil. Bot Neil. RL God says, what's the highest clock you've ever achieved? What about you, Neil? What's your highest clock?
6.7 gigahertz on a 3770K.
That's pretty good. That's very nice.
That's a fair effort.
Haven't been anywhere close since then.
And like the actual overall record, category record is about 7.2, so that's pretty impressive.
And Intel chips usually have a lower frequency ceiling compared to the AMD chips, but are actually more efficient in the process of
And talk about frequency, there's another question from Gis4 Jaffers saying, wouldn't you say that it's arguably more impressive to run an overclock at 7.7 gigahertz by being able to have it stable and get good benchmark results? I assume you didn't show a benchmark because it's much more grueling and crashing is more frequent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fair call. Yeah, for sure.
That's how I overclock. I go a little bit higher, run all the benchmarks to get all the scores I can, and then try a little bit higher, run them all again, and then when it crashes, I just give up and move on.
I'd say
That's when it's time to drink beer.
those are two different types of overclocking, two different challenges as well. I wouldn't particularly say that it's easier to get like a higher frequency, or it's more difficult to get it more stable or anything like that. When you're at the edge of stability, whether it's running a benchmark that has that's multi-threaded, that runs on all the cores, or it's a benchmark that just runs on one core, or it's just trying to get the highest frequency like we did here. They're all very challenging when you hit that limit. So trying to get 8.4 gigahertz can take you months as well, whereas it can take like a day to get to a stable frequency.
Yeah, right. Because like we were talking earlier about having these sort of overclocking meets where everyone flies in and we spend a week or so focused on particular outcomes that we want to achieve. But there can be a month plus of actual preparation for that. So making sure that everything's in place, ready to go. So you're not just fussing about trying to chase your tail. You're actually able to hit those markers that you've set for yourselves.
And we've done this in the past as well. Neil and I have done a couple of demonstrations, just the two of us, and you'll see me actually hitting some scores at half an hour in, whereas Neil's still reinstalling his operating system at 5.5 gigahertz when I'm hitting 6 gigahertz and actually running benchmarks, because I've spent that time setting up my operating system prior to it. So.
We've got a question on the left here.
Go ahead.
Right, first question, since we're going on time, is there a way we can ask questions after the session?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, first real question. Most electronic components have a upper and lower threshold that they're able to operate at. I work in embedded engineering, and we had our card crash when we did low temperature testing at like negative, like the chips, some chips like negative 35, negative 25 or something tolerance. And the DDI chip started not working at a certain low temperature. How is it that you can actually use liquid nitrogen and get your negative 100 and something degrees without it actually dying because of the low temperature itself?
James, I think he's talking about cold bugs here. Do you want to teach the guys about cold bugs?
This is an interesting one. Every chip you test, we call this a cold bug. And a cold bug is a temperature at which you can't go below, the system will shut down or stop working. So if I were to go and pick 5 different chips, they'd all have a different cold bug. So that's part of that binning process that Peter explained at the start. It's not just about frequency, but we also need a chip that can run a cold temperature. So these AMD chips can go to 8 gigahertz because they can run minus 196 and colder. Whereas like some of the newer Intel chips will only run 120, some older chips could only run minus 10.
Yeah,
or
like
they could run minus 20, but they couldn't reach their full
FX53.
potential. So if you tried a different manufacturer or 10 different chips, you get 10 different results.
So ultimately, the lowest operating temperature, it boils down to how the hardware manufacturer configures these processors, the effort that they put in place to ensure that it works at that kind of a low temperature.
Yeah, like I can think back to a time when I was in Austin, Texas for the AMD Phenom 2 launch, and that was a big deal because of what it could do temperature-wise. Previously, the Phenom 1 generation, you were cold bugging around minus 25, minus 35 degrees Celsius, but the Phenom 2, suddenly you could run full pot. And I remember, full pot means about minus 180. And I remember coming back from the US and calling Dino up. I'm like, dude, you're free tomorrow? We got to have a OC session. He's like, why? And I'm like, just trust me, I got something special with me that I brought back. And I remember setting this thing up, and then I'm like, hey, Dino, start pouring. He's like, yeah, okay. And we get down to about minus 10. He's like, so whereabouts are we stopping? I'm like, no, just keep going. Just keep going. Just keep going. We got right down to, and it was reading about minus 180 on the probe, and he just started losing it because the coolant, the liquid nitrogen, usually it violently bubbles around, and it just started simmering. And yeah, we just lost it. It was pretty cool.
I'll actually take one of your first question that relates to this. I'll take the last question from Twitch stream, and then later we can have a chat to you guys. Basically, Overclocking TV is asking how can people get involved in their local overclocking community. So your question was if you can ask questions later. Right now, we're about to go to Intel booth, and we are starting a show setup for at 12:10. And we are actually going to do some hands-on stuff. You guys can come over, ask any questions you want, how you can get involved. As far as Australian scene is concerned, Overclockers Australia is a great place to kind of join up and say, hey guys, you know, I kind of saw what you're doing, I'd like to get involved. iFormemory.com and also hwbot.org. So it's basically a gathering of all the global overclockers, a large community. You can kind of get in touch with people there, read what they do. I kind of lurked for a little while until I got involved with the community myself. But that's essentially the way we normally all started in overclocking.
Primarily Overclockers Australia, so it's forums.overclockers.com.au.
And I think for the community side of things, most important thing is just check the egos at the door, leave them there. And, you know, there is a bit of stirring, you know, there's a bit of back and forth, a bit of banter, but it all comes from a really light-hearted place. So that's one of the most important parts, it's just being really welcoming of others. Yeah.
I think
Cool.
time is about up.
Yeah, I think it's about time.
All right, thank you guys for coming. If you have any questions, just go and check them out at the Intel booth. Have fun at PAX as well.
Yeah. Hi to everyone from Canada, Taiwan, France, Australia, and wherever else.